The UK has had a bit of an interesting time when it comes to the issue of Palestine recently. To put it mildly, I did a video a while ago on the topic and I haven't returned to it other than the occasional reference where relevant in other videos, mostly because what can you say about it that isn't already being said, but I don't already say on basically every other social media platform that I'm on, that you probably say as well. It is, to me, the defining issue of the present day, not just because the scale of the catastrophe Israel and its allies have inflicted is enormous, but because of how the issue reaches into the core contradictions of the world as we understood it before this latest escalation in Israel's ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. You all know all of this, so let me explain why I feel moved to talk about it again now. It's because there does seem to have been a shift of sorts, a limited one, but a noticeable one, especially among journalists, media personalities, and politicians, including some reporting of interesting shifts within senior members of parliament, particularly members of the Labour cabinet. Also, I will admit that I don't live under a rock, and there has been some criticisms made of a certain creator. Let's stop fucking around, it's ContraPoints, and this video isn't about her awful statement or about her wider, very milquetoast politics. There are other videos that do a good job of talking about that and what the actual issue is. I recommend the Pillars of Garbage video on the topic, which I think is the best one and probably best summarizes how I feel about it. It's been on my mind more than usual, and this subtle shift is something worth talking about, especially in the context of how Palestine has functioned in British politics, particularly over the past decade or so. There has been a lot of effort expended in the UK to make support for Palestine basically impossible, whether that means the social penalties, press attention, or blacklisting from politics, or worse, or what can only be interpreted as an attempt through the prescription of the group Palestine Action to make support for Palestine essentially illegal, since anything that could be interpreted as support for the prescribed group could result in a prison sentence of up to 14 years, which is great and very proportionate. In fact, we've already seen 80-year-olds getting arrested on these grounds, as well as police harassing anyone with any public display of support for Palestine. A good example is the person who was arrested for displaying a replica of an image that featured in the Private Eye, a satirical magazine. This is the culmination of a gradually escalating series of panics that I think really started when Ed Miliband, as Labour leader, said that he would recognise the state of Palestine, that has sought to categorise any support for Palestinians that suggests Israel has acted in a way that merits some kind of action, some kind of consequence, is in itself anti-Semitic. Now, I will always make this point whenever it comes up. The conflation of all Jewish people with the state of Israel is itself a conflation that is considered anti-Semitic and makes anti-Semitism more likely to occur. This conflation was central to a campaign that saw a number of senior left-wing figures, most notably the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, being accused of anti-Semitism, with one journalist saying that he was going to reopen Auschwitz. Don't believe me? Here's the clip. I'm serious. That is a thing that actually happened.
It's appalling for this country that if we do have a general election at the moment, we're going to face a choice between Coco the Clown's degenerate younger brother and a man who wants to reopen Auschwitz.
This has been the atmosphere that we have to contend against as supporters of Palestine in the UK, now including potential terrorism charges if we express our support for Palestine in the wrong words, in a way that implies we support a group whose political objective was the majority position in terms of public opinion in the UK. The moment where I felt that this video was going to happen eventually was when I was alerted to the front page of the Daily Express, a right-wing newspaper in the UK. I won't show you this front page because I believe that if you're here, you've probably seen more than enough images that have come out of Gaza and Palestine more generally. If you are curious, it's the front page for July 23rd, 2025. The front page depicted an emaciated child called Muhammad with the words, "For pity's sake, stop this now." And I was struck by it for a number of reasons. Of course, because it is simply a striking image of this poor child who did nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place. But also because the Express and the political right to which it is aligned is one of the most strongly pro-Israel political forces in the country. For this newspaper to produce this headline said that something had happened. Some threshold had been crossed. That even the shell of a person who would work for the Express feels something about this. And it's a feeling that has effectively been criminalized, has been derided as racism, has been mocked by that paper itself and its ideological allies. It is also a view that has not been represented by the leadership of any of the three major political forces in this country. Not Labour, not the Conservatives, and certainly not Reform. And that speaks to a massive break somewhere between the public opinion that newspapers, all media outlets really, have to pander to some extent, and the views of the senior politicians in this country. Another moment that gave me pause was this clip I saw on Blue Sky of Aisha Hazarika, a former Ed Miliband staffer and member of the House of Lords. For some reason, I really couldn't tell you why. Someone who has taken every opportunity to defend Israel, the Labour leadership's position on Israel, and who participated in creating the atmosphere I talked about earlier. She has finally acknowledged that war crimes are being committed and that all of this has gone, to use her words, too far. Though she qualifies this with the word now, and of course with the customary condemnation of October 7th. This speaks to why I'm not getting carried away here. Yes, it is remarkable that even the biggest partisans of Israel or of pro-Israel leadership in the UK are expressing the simple truth that we were all able to see. Even so, they can't help but say the same shit that got us to this point, including a reference to Israel's right to defend itself. If we're playing the international law game now, if that is suddenly an acceptable lens through which to analyse this, then why are we still reifying that supposed right? As an occupier, Israel has no right to defend itself, but the Palestinians, as I said in my previous video about this, way back when, have every right to resist the occupation. So even though this did make me think that some kind of shift has been occurring, it tempered my expectations. Because throughout this, it is implied that this threshold has been crossed recently and seeks to confuse us as to who is to blame here. You also see this in the shift that has begun among the political class. It's clear that some members of parliament and even of the cabinet have decided that now is the time to put pressure on the government. One of the initial signs of this was a report that Keir Starmer was under pressure from members of his cabinet to recognise the state of Palestine. In the Guardian article, particular attention was called to Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood. More on those two and why they're suddenly associating themselves with this later on. Spoiler alert, it's really self-serving and cynical. More recently, 220 MPs have signed a letter calling on the government to recognise the state of Palestine, with French President Macron's decision that France will recognise Palestine adding more pressure onto our government. Now, I have some thoughts on how useful that will be, but for now, let's look at what fruit this pressure has produced and how stark the shift has been from the Prime Minister in response. I'll put the Prime Minister's statement up on the screen at this point. It was posted with the caption, "The suffering and starvation unfolding in Gaza is unspeakable and indefensible." And if you read through it, it goes to great pains to not really ascribe any particular responsibility for the humanitarian catastrophe it describes. It doesn't identify Israel as the responsible party, which it is. It doesn't set out what Britain will do about this if Israel continues to inflict this catastrophe onto the Palestinians, which it will. It doesn't set out consequences. It doesn't do anything. It's a do-nothing statement designed to make rubes feel better about the course this has taken. Of course, and as always, we have the usual platitudes to release the hostages and to a two-state solution, a solution that Israel and its civil society clearly doesn't want. And even if it did, the impositions that would be put upon a Palestinian state in that situation would be a mockery of statehood. But that's beside the point here. Keir Starmer is refusing to name Israel as responsible, to set out consequences, because he's supported this all the way up until now. Who, after all, can forget the time he said that Israel had the right to withhold power and water from the Palestinians as part of a siege?
Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sakir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
Even though this statement is basically worthless, it does represent some kind of shift, but its lack of substance, its lack of engagement with the reality of what the government has supported almost uncritically up until now is something that makes me think this is bullshit. You're telling me the UK provided reconnaissance for the Israelis, and we're just now realizing there's something wrong? It's kind of a wonder the Israelis bothered looking at anything we sent to them in that case. This, and the continued availability of people willing to still side unconditionally with Israel, like Caroline Flint in this appearance on Good Morning Britain, where in response to reports that Israeli soldiers were playing a game, as they put it, where they shoot different body parts of children, responded in this chilling fashion.
And Israel is a functioning democracy. It is understandable.
Like, my God, you can just feel the evil emanating from her. This sort of thing makes me want to not overstate the case for this shift. It is noticeable, yes, but there are still people willing to present these frankly extreme and radicalized opinions on national TV, and who don't face consequences for that. To give you a sense of how fringe these ideas are, British public opinion has pretty much settled on the side of the Palestinians. For example, a clear majority of British people oppose Israel's action in Gaza, and a plurality describe its actions as genocide, alongside plurality or majority support for various measures that could be imposed upon Israel as a consequence for that genocide. I'm not going to say that this shift has happened all of a sudden. British public opinion has never really been like America's on the topic. Support for Israel is not the assumed default position, at least in terms of the public. It's been much more contested, much more even, and since October 7th, seems to have shifted decisively away from Israel, since, you know, genocide is notoriously unpopular. It does feel, though, as if the pro-genocide factions in our society and in our press, politics, wherever else, are becoming maybe a little more isolated, which is a good thing. But it does raise a question that hasn't really been asked yet of our political and media class, which is, why now? Why now? That is the question that is haunting me through all of this, and it's gone painfully unasked. It's frustrating, because once again the British public has called a major foreign policy issue, largely correctly, and have got there faster than the press and political class, and yet now politicians and journalists are almost awaiting our applause for their Damascene conversion to the position that Palestinian life has equal value, or at least some value, but an equal value to anyone else's. I want to take a moment to explain why this question is important, especially in the context of this newfound opposition to Israel and the way that it's been expressed. Throughout, you get this impression that now Israel has gone too far, that some recent action has turned on the part of their brain where they express basic humanity. A humanity that I would hope we all share. They need to be made to explain precisely at what point they think this has gone too far, because we've all seen the images, heard the stories, seen the TikToks of Israeli soldiers. This has been a live streamed genocide. The information was there for all to see, and frankly, the only way to not see it, to not understand it, in my opinion, is if you supported it. Which is why there needs to be explanations. If this isn't the case, why speak out now? What was the piece of evidence that was missing? It matters because it will tell us exactly where the line is and what it was that prevented them from seeing what we all saw. I think on a basic human level, we need to be made to understand this. Otherwise, we're left to fill in the gaps, and based on the public record, and we're going to speculate along these lines. And spoiler alert, it doesn't exactly reflect well on them. Let's take the pressure supposedly being exerted by the cabinet on the Prime Minister, most notably by Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood. What do these two people have in common, besides constantly being mentioned as working together towards Wes Streeting's inevitable leadership challenge? Okay, I did do a video about him where I said I thought this was likely, but the truth is, I'm not sure if it is. That's because of the thing Streeting and Mahmood have in common. They both took formerly safe Labour seats, especially in the context of a Conservative collapse, and almost lost them. Streeting's majority is around 500 votes, Mahmood's is a few thousand, 3,000 if I'm recalling correctly, which is rather more impressive. But given Labour's collapse and the salience of the issue of Palestine currently, which was blamed, I think, in a little bit of a reductive fashion for these collapses in the 2024 election, they might be in trouble. And regardless of how I think the press and political class misunderstand the way Gaza functioned in these results, something I get into more in my video on John Ashworth, a cynical person would look at this in two ways. One as an attempt to shore up support in seats that will almost certainly be lost at this rate at the next election. Two as posturing ahead of a leadership contest. Of course, you can't discount that cowardice has played a role in all of this. That there was a pervasive fear among the Wes Streetings of the world that if they spoke out, the control freak in charge of Labour, who was relentlessly committed to supporting the genocide, would take them out somehow. Or indeed, that under the atmosphere of panic that had been generated around support for Palestine, that it would have been considered politically challenging, to put it mildly, which is still cowardice and has led to some outrageous admissions. Actually, I'm not sure if it's an admission or speculation on the part of the author, but I actually immediately thought of the Independent article where Labour's support for genocide was blamed on... Actually, wait. You know what? I'm going to let you guess who it was blamed on. Was it blamed on A, Keir Starmer, B, an institutional culture that sees Palestinian life as less valuable than Israeli life, C, the character of the British state generally being pro-genocide, or D, Jeremy Corbyn? I'll give you a minute for it. I don't think you need that long. If you guessed D, Jeremy Corbyn, you're right. In an article in The Independent, David Maddox wrote, as an explanation for why it had taken Labour so long to impose sanctions on certain Israeli ministers, and I promise you I am not making this quote up, you can go look at the article, it will be linked in the description. This is what he said. In reality, Labour under Sir Keir Starmer has been held back by a sense of shame. A visible reminder of this came when former leader Jeremy Corbyn got to his feet to challenge Lammy. Under Corbyn's leadership, Labour became so immersed in anti-Semitism and so marginalised the Jewish community that the party has had to continue to work hard to restore its reputation. For this reason, Sir Keir and Mr. Lammy have worked hard to support Israel's right to defend itself in the wake of the horrific 7th of October 2023 attacks by Hamas. Which I think we can agree, given that at the time this was written, Keir Starmer and David Lammy were Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary respectively, and Jeremy Corbyn was an independent opposition MP. This is an absurd position to take, to render two of the most powerful figures in the UK, who had just won an election based on rejecting that independent MP, at least how they tell it, to render them powerless in the face of his might is, I don't know, perhaps a sign that the press is still obsessed with making that guy the main character. To be clear, this is a cowardly justification, which again also makes that conflation between Jewish people generally and Israel. I also wonder if there's maybe in a way an element of truth to the idea that it was because of the big bad marrow-wielding bastard. The reason I think this is because if you were a politician or a journalist who contributed to and benefited from that moral panic, wouldn't turning on it be difficult? Like trying to force toothpaste back into a tube. In fact, we've seen recently that LBC host James O'Brien has been given some of the same treatment he dished out to the left, which it's hard not to feel a little bit of schadenfreude about, even if it's actually still a bit of a problem and a function of the same thing that we should be opposing here. If you now, and there's that word again, now, concede that something must be done, even if it's a purely symbolic move, then you need to explain how the things that people were pointing out before weren't going to lead here, and given that's clearly impossible, you're left with needing to explain that, yeah, you confected a bunch of outrage for political purposes, which I get why they don't want to admit that, especially Labour MPs whose current governing project's cornerstone is a rejection of the left, at least in some significant part, on these grounds. Of course, you might say that this issue has already contributed to the collapse of their political project, so what's lost by just telling the truth and acting on the truth? And the answer is, it's as always, that there's no incentive to be the first one, because they will fucking destroy you. Then I have darker thoughts, and I try not to indulge them because I don't want to think this of other people. But when we're confronted by the magnitude of the ongoing genocide that Israel is conducting and its allies are supporting, you do wonder if part of this sudden shift that's seen even Tory MPs attack Labour on their inaction. A Tory MP told David Lammy that he could be in The Hague for this. That's a Tory MP from the party that absolutely supports Israel all the way. I do wonder if this is because they know that to some extent, for a lot of people it is too late. That these late Damascene conversions are a sort of Pascal's wager where they both get the genocide they supported and the outcome they wanted, but can at least claim to have acted and spoken against it, thus earning some kind of forgiveness. The cold truth of the behaviour and the course this has taken in the British political and media spheres is, these people are getting what they wanted. They may not have known the full extent of what they wanted, but their conduct pointed to this. This was always the natural endpoint of what Israel and Zionism as a political project was. And they wanted it, and have tried to make opposition to both politically unfeasible, and in some cases illegal. So what are we to think of this? Why now? I can't move past the idea that this is a negotiation, that they knew this was where it was going all along, and now they've got to this point, they want it to be done, a different way. A way that isn't so visceral and emotive that the Express puts it on their front page. What I think has happened is that the pace of this has become too fast for some to tolerate, but the ultimate outcome is still desirable for them. That question, why now, is one we should be asking of our representatives and of journalists. Of course, it's not all of them. Some politicians and some journalists have maybe not been perfect, but they have at least understood this issue and knew where this was going. And for those that weren't, I think the biggest issue is they still don't understand it at its core, or how this is altering their relationship with the British public. This is the other frustration I feel, which is that despite this slight shift, they still don't get it. And I think that's why we've seen things like statements that don't assign blame, or that still don't understand the core of the problem. There are two components to this. The first I want to talk about is the way this issue has played with the public. a lot of politicians and journalists are acting as if they're brilliant geniuses for seeing what we've all seen all along, and that pisses me off. I think it probably pisses you off too. It has the same energy as your mate submitting his coursework at the last minute. They just come across as a smug twat. And in the case of your uni mate being disorganized, it's not a big deal. But in this case, you do wonder if they had seen what you'd seen, or at least not pretended to be blind to it, would the situation have been different? My personal frustration aside, this isn't the usual level of ignoring public opinion that we see in the UK. It's one thing to ignore the UK public's support for a wealth tax. Is that bad? Yes. But it's not an issue where the public feel moral revulsion. A lot has been made about the New Left Party, but one of the reasons it can even poll as well as it does, pull in as many members as it does, as a new party is because the public are disgusted with the political class, rightly so. That question of why now is going to be the epitaph of at least the Labour Party, it seems. I wouldn't rule out it spreading like a contagion to other parties too. The second frustration is you look at the proposed solutions and you just go, this isn't the issue. When people like Wes Streeting put pressure on Keir Starmer to recognise Palestine, or those MPs sign that letter, or Macron goes ahead and just does it, you're just like, okay, cool, that would have been great decades ago, but what does this change now? Even in the face of the genocide, they can't fucking wrap their heads around it. I think because of those reasons I outlined earlier, and a little bit of self-preservation, they're trying to do the absolute minimum to avoid the quite justified wrath that their political actions ought to incur. The issue isn't whether Britain, France, or whoever recognises a Palestinian state. Plenty of countries have recognised Palestine. Did it stop the genocide? Did it stop this escalation in that genocide? We know the tragic answer to this, and I think if we're being honest, we know what the real problem is. It's the existence of a supremacist state that can only exist in the way its society prefers, through genocide. That's the issue, and until there are politicians willing to grapple with that, we'll continue to get these embarrassing half measures. Though to be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't recognise Palestine, or this pressure isn't a shift in the landscape. It is, and we should, but it doesn't address the actual issue, and it wouldn't obligate us any more than we already are obligated to take measures to prevent genocide, like stopping arms sales, not doing reconnaissance flights, not providing political support. We could do sanctions, embargoes. These are things that would not only represent a big shift, a massive shift in British policy and the political landscape, but actually at least get at something relevant to what's happening on the ground. The sad part is, this shift as it currently exists is too little too late. That's my real feeling about all of this. A frustration that I could see it, that you probably saw it, that the general public saw it and understood it. Maybe not in the same terms as us, and maybe we all didn't understand it in exactly the same way, but on a basic human level we understood it. And why didn't they? Why couldn't they? Why did they choose to turn a blind eye to this? All while a lot of these same figures howl with fury at Russia, whose invasion of Ukraine was a grave crime. But are the Palestinians not also the victims of a grave crime? Have they not been tortured at the hands of Israel for decades at this point? Why is it always us who are ahead of the curve, but who are punished for that? Of course, part of the answer is that it's embarrassing. For our political and media class in the UK, they regard the general public as swine, pig people, scum. And let me ask you, if you regarded a group of people so lowly and they were showing you up, wouldn't you double down and use every instrument at your disposal to ensure even temporarily ensure your victory? There are a number of feelings I want to express here that I just can't bring myself to, because it doesn't feel like the time or the place. Instead, what I want to do is just try to wrap this up in some kind of coherent way. So we're gonna try and do that, and we're gonna try and bring this to a close. One thing I really don't want people to do, and I don't want to do, is give into despair. Yes, the images coming out have been harrowing for almost 2 years now, but it's important for us to understand this basic point. There are still people in Gaza, in Palestine, who have hopes and dreams. They have people they like, people who annoy them. You know, they are full people in every respect. They have lives to live, and they should get the chance to live them. It's up to us to do whatever we can to keep up the pressure that's produced this little shift. Is it enough? No. Does it frustrate and anger me in a number of ways? Obviously. That's why this video is kind of an incoherent mess, and I'm sorry about that. And I'm also sure that you also share that frustration. That being said, now is not the time to give up or forget. I guess that's why I wanted to make this video, to tell you that we shouldn't give up, and that while this is all aggravating, we can do our part. I also want to say that if you're a regular member of the public and it maybe took you a bit of time to come to this position, you didn't know enough, you weren't paying close enough attention, I don't mean you when I say what I'm going to say. I am glad that you found your way to the correct position, to the side of humanity. But to those politicians and journalists, those cynical last-second converts, we shouldn't forgive them. We shouldn't allow them to forget what they supported and how obvious it was that this was going to be the consequence of that. Because a lot of people are going to suddenly say they were always against this, and we shouldn't allow them to whitewash that. Remind them of it every day, because they should be fucking ashamed of themselves. With that, all I have left to say is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you for watching, everyone. I need to thank my proofreader, who once again read this on the day that I was recording, so thank you to her. I also want to say, if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. This video is not the video I had planned. It was kind of written in a rush because it was just incoherent thoughts, so if you did enjoy it, I would appreciate it. And also, this video is not likely to really do well in the algorithm. It's not likely to reach many people, and frankly, fuck the algorithm, fuck that. I don't give a shit. If YouTube wants to like have a problem with this video, it can have a fucking problem with it. I don't give a shit. And part of the reason I can say that is because of the support of the patrons. There are a few things that the patrons do give me, and the members, also the YouTube members, of course, and it's the confidence to do videos like this where I can just say, fuck it, here's what I really think. And also I want to apologize to the patrons and members. I know this isn't the video that you expected this month, and I have explained why this has happened, but good news for you, you are getting 2 big videos next month, assuming that things do not develop on that front. But thank you, all of you have been super understanding about it, you've been super supportive, I really appreciate that. And I really also specifically appreciate our top tier patrons, Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kersley Scheider, John N, Liron, Jar Jar Muba, and Carolyn, absolute legends, I love them to bits. And I also love our YouTube members, Nadir, Jiwa, Katie Marshall, Roger Zugi, Scaly Bubble, Ben Johnson, also absolute legends. I really appreciate the support that you all give me. It really, really does give me the confidence to just put together a video like this, which is maybe a bit incoherent, a bit rough, a bit, I don't know what this is, honestly, but the support you give me lets me have a go at something like this and approach topics like this. So thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot. I will catch you all on the next video. Take it easy, everyone. Try to look after yourselves. And yeah, I will see you then. Goodbye.